Black and white film has a timeless magic that captures light, shadow, and texture in a way color never can. Back in the 90s when I started shooting film, it was all black and white. That's just all I shot. In my mind, color didn't even exist. So back then it was mostly just shooting with friends at skate parks, once in a while the random turtle. But the fact that I could shoot and develop the film and then go and print it in my darkroom in the same day, that just was incredible to me. So in this video, I'm gonna share with you some really cool tips that I have learned along the way that will help you get better results from your black and white film. Tip number one is gonna be to get to know one film and one developer really, really well. There are really a lot of amazing films on the market today, and in reality, any one of these black and white films from a major manufacturer is gonna get you really, really excellent results. So it's important to find one that fits your shooting style and one that has the characteristics that you like. Just because they make this many films doesn't mean you have to haphazardly shoot them all. In fact, that will hinder your progress and growth as a black and white film photographer. That's because switching between films can just make things unnecessarily complicated at first. Try out one film and developer combo and stick with it for a while until you understand how it handles exposure and development, how it renders shadows and highlights. When you really know a film well, it will give you predictable results, and that's gonna help you grow and learn faster and accelerate growth as a black and white film photographer. Tip number two, expose for the shadows and develop for your highlights. And I would say in general, the exposure is the most important part because you can't recover shadow detail if there's no detail in the negative. That makes it really important to get the shadows right and place them where you want them. So in general, you're going to want to err on the side of overexposure versus underexposure. And a really simple way to make sure you're getting good shadow detail with a built-in light meter in your camera is to, when you're out shooting, angle the camera down towards the shadows or bias towards the shadows. Then development controls the contrast of the film overall. The longer you develop or the more active the developer, the more contrast the midtones and the highlights are gonna get. And conversely, the shorter the development or the less active the developer, the less contrast that higher end is gonna have. So this is one of the very unique and amazing features of black and white film. And this is why we expose for the shadows and develop for the highlights. If you're shooting in a very dull scene, let's say, what you can do is expose for the shadows and then extend the development, and that's gonna bring the image more contrast and more pop. And conversely, if you're in a very high contrast, like I mentioned before, like a backlit scene, you can expose for the shadows and then bring the highlights down with reduced development. Especially from a darkroom printing perspective, this is the magic of black and white film. Tip number three, use photographic elements to your advantage. Black and white film allows you to emphasize mood, emotion, and even storytelling without the distracting element of color. Sometimes color can be a distraction. Take that red door as an example. It really kind of just draws your eye because of the contrast in the color. Now, if you just take and remove it, it no longer has that effect. Black and white photography relies heavily on contrast. Even how much contrast is used when printing a photo can say a lot about its intent. Pay attention to how light interacts with your subject. Strong shadows and highlights can add depth and drama to your images. You also want to look for strong textures and patterns that can stand out in the absence of color. Use leading lines, the rule of thirds, and framing to create compelling images. These are all different elements that can make really strong black and white images. All right, the next tip is going to be to give developing your own film a try. It's really, really cheap and it's really, really easy to do. And it's gonna give you a really good understanding of what's going on with the exposure and the overall contrast and characteristics of your film. On top of that, it's a really rewarding process and it's gonna give you full control over your results. And if you start developing your own film when you're actually out shooting, what can really help is to jot down some notes for individual frames or even for the whole roll of film. give it a little description, maybe how you metered it, and then just an overall feeling of the scene. Like, was it high contrast? Was it pretty normal? Or was it low contrast? Often when I'm out on a run and just shooting pictures, I will use my notes app and I can dictate through my headphones. It will just open up and make a note of the frame or whatever I'm shooting. But I have to tell you, your mileage may vary on this one. Blame 16 meteors for the shadow's fate at 1/200th of a chicken. What the hell does that mean? But even having a few general notes on a frame or on the whole roll can really help you understand what went right and what went wrong with that those shots on that roll of film. And this will go a long way in improving your black and white game. Now, before we move on to the last tip, you're gonna wanna smash that subscribe button. That way you won't miss future videos and you will be able to learn and get better at film photography. All right, so the last tip, use color filters. Color filters can have a huge impact on how your final images look. A yellow filter will give your black and white film more of a normal look and contrast to what you would think it would have. And it does this because panchromatic films are a little bit oversensitive to blue, and the yellow absorbs some of that blue wavelength. This will help you separate, say, clouds from a blue sky, and it will also give a little bit more contrast and punch into your shadows. The deeper yellow, orange, and red filters will have a more dramatic effect by blocking out more amounts of blue light. These filters can have a significant impact of the overall look and contrast of your image. Now, if you go to a green filter, that will darken red subjects, and it will darken blue skies as well, just not to the extent of the yellow, oranges, and reds. So what I would do is just get like a yellow filter to start, and get one the size for your biggest thread mount if you have more than one lens. And what you can do is get a step-up ring so you can use that on all your smaller lenses as well. So if there's enough light, I typically use a yellow filter on most of my smaller format cameras, just in general. It acts as a nice little add of contrast, and it's not overpowering like a lot of the other filters, so it's kind of a mild effect. And it also adds a layer of protection to my lenses. So as a quick recap, here are the tips for getting better black and white film photos. Get to know one film and one developer, expose for the shadows, develop for the highlights, use photographic elements to your advantage, develop your own film, and use color filters. These tips are fundamental, and they're gonna help you get better black and white images. I guarantee it. If you go through and try some of these, you'll see results. And if you wanna learn how to get perfectly developed negatives, you're gonna wanna watch this video next.
A man may not be on the top of his form, but he can still make himself useful.